Hi, this is Kamera. My first few minutes with God, day number 294, Matthew chapter 17, Mark chapter 9, Luke chapter 9, verses 28 through 62. Jesus, he takes three of his disciples up to a high mountain so that they can be alone and to pray. Those disciples are Peter, James, and John. As they watched Jesus pray, they said that he became very bright, like he transformed. His clothes became very white. His face began to shine like the sun. So as he began to pray, you had Elijah or during the time he was praying, Elijah and Moses appeared. And they began to talk to Jesus about his exodus from this world, which was about to be fulfilled in Jerusalem. One of the books that we read mentioned that the disciples had been asleep and then they awakened and then they saw Moses and Elijah. But as they began to leave, you had Peter to call out, and basically, I call him the voice of the people. And he was like, it's wonderful for us to be here. Let us make, these three shelters as memorial to each of you. And so then you had this cloud to overshadow them, and then a voice came from the cloud that basically said that this is my son who brings me joy, and he tells them to listen to him. So this terrified the disciples. Jesus went by, touched them, and told them not to be afraid, but he also instructed them, don't tell anyone of this experience until after he had risen from the dead. Disciples still confused about that. They don't like the sound of that till after you've risen from the dead, that type of thing. They didn't voice it though. So the disciples, they questioned Jesus about this, what the religious teachers of the law were insisting. They were insisting Elijah must return before the Messiah comes. So Jesus, he tells them, well, Elijah has already come, but he wasn't recognized, and they chose to abuse him. In the same way, they're going to abuse basically or make the Son of Man suffer. And so the disciples, they realized that he was talking about John the Baptist. So after coming down the mountain, you had a crowd of people who met with Jesus. A man approaches Jesus and begs him to help his son. His son had been suffering with seizures. And so he says, your disciples couldn't help him. And so Jesus, he speaks to the demon and he tells this demon, listen, you spirit that makes this boy unable to hear and speak. He says, come out of him and don't you ever come back in him again. And so the spirit, he screams and he throws the boy to the ground and then he leaves the boy. Yeah. Later, the disciples, they asked, well, why couldn't we do that? So Jesus says, because of your faith. You didn't have enough faith. But if you had the faith the size of a mustard seed, anything, you could move anything. Isn't that something? And he tells them nothing would have been impossible for you. And so Jesus, he tells his disciples that when someone was going to betray him, then he would be killed, and then he would rise again 3 days later. Yeah, isn't that something? So to hear that, they never like when Jesus hears that. So later, the disciples, they argued who is the greatest. And so Jesus basically, they didn't tell Jesus what they were talking about, but he knew their thoughts. And he tells them whoever wants to be first must be last and servant to all. So later, John tells Jesus that he had to stop this man from casting demons out of people because this man was not part of their group. And Jesus tells him, he says, anybody who is not against us is for us. But he also tells them that if something offends you that will cause you to sin, then you need to cut it off. And he gives them a few examples. But anything that's going to lead us to sin, we need to cut that off, right? So Jesus is near, but Peter is the one who the tax collectors address about paying taxes. So when Peter goes inside, Jesus already know the conversation, and he tells Peter to go cast his line and catch a fish, open the fish's mouth, remove the corn, and go pay their taxes. Isn't that something? Go pay their taxes with the corn you get from the fish's mouth. Isn't that something? And so there were people who would come to Jesus and they would tell Jesus they want to follow him. And he told them of what it would cost for them to follow him. I mean, it doesn't cost them anything financially as far as, you have to pay a dues or whatever. But he tells them that you're going to have to give up a lot to follow him. You have to give up a lot of luxuries. That can't be your priority. It has to, preaching the kingdom has to be priority. And that's basically what he was telling them. So there you have it, guys. It's day number 294. Matthew chapter 17, Mark chapter 9, Luke chapter 9, verses 28 through 62. You have a God-filled blessed day.